Welcome. This is for both parents and students. So, this is a recap of the two seventh grade lessons that we've been doing so far on creative sentence writing. So, I had students do an activity where they needed to create six sentences, and many students were saying something along the lines of just go to Google Translate. I can tell when students use Google Translate. Students who can't produce a conjugated verb in the classroom suddenly are perfectly doing the past tense and doing weird stem changing verbs that students who would be doing in their third or fourth year successfully. So it was kind of obvious. And then I had other students who just stopped and said, how do you form a sentence? So I wanted to give students some encouragement and to show them some basic building blocks about how to start this process. In order to do so, we needed to dig into a little bit of grammar. So maybe some of you parents will remember this from your elementary school to middle school days. However, I felt like when I was talking to students, a lot of these were new. So, first we need to talk about what are direct objects in English or in Spanish. So, the boy throws the ball to me. So, we've got four parts of the sentence right here. The first one is the subject. The subject does the action. It can be a noun or a pronoun. Then we have the verb, the action of the sentence. And finally, we have the direct object. So the direct object is going to be the ball because this is who or what the action is done with. Or, yes. So this can get a little bit tricky. I'm not going to super try students. However, I did a couple do nows with students to help raise their awareness. So now, the subject directly does this, it does the verb, and it is, excuse me, in the case of the ball, all right, throws the ball. However, often we're going to see something like to me, or someone might say, so and so passes me a note. A note in this case is still what we pass. The ball is still what we throw. And because of this, it's still the direct object. However, to me, for me, this is going to be the indirect object. An indirect object are who or what receives the action in the sentence. So I wanted to give students this idea of having them understand that they can manipulate certain words. And once they know how to use one or two words, they have a wide range of possibilities to expand upon this sentence. You can create a sentence in Spanish. For example, we sing could be cantamos. We can drop nosotros. So nosotros cantamos becomes we sing because amos at the end of cantar expresses the idea that it is we who are singing. So I asked students to take a look at this chart, and each one of these blocks was a vocabulary word that they have seen so far, or this was a noun that we have been focusing on. We've been focusing on AR verbs. So I asked students to write a sentence using this information. So I had students write something like El hombre alto baila tango. So the tall man dances tango. Or la coche roja. All right. Viaja a Mexico. So the red car travels to Mexico. Students were able to do this. One thing that was limiting them a little bit, and I'm going to get into it in a second, was they were needing prepositions. So we expanded this lesson on. In order to do that, I wanted to show students how easy it was for them to create longer and more interesting sentences with the knowledge they already have. So we took a quick discussion of clauses. So clauses are simple sentences. They express a complete idea, and they can be their own sentence, but often clauses are added on to another. So here is another thing, is a dependent clause, also known as a subordinate clause, cannot stand on its own. It expresses a partial thought. Usually there is a preposition or a conjunction. And because of that preposition or conjunction, there is an expectation that we have an additional sentence. Often subordinate clauses are marked with a comma to separate them from the rest of the sentence. However, not always. So they must be attached to an independent clause. So we talked about the four types of sentences. Today we're going to be focusing on compound and complex. So a simple sentence is an independent clause, and that's it. Just one very simple sentence. So the ones that we saw beforehand that students were working with, where they were adding the subject, verb, an adjective, and an object. It's one that we were talking about beforehand. There's another. Take two independent sentences and add a conjunction. So and, or, but, and because. And you have a compound sentence. Next, to create a complex sentence, you're going to take a dependent clause and you're going to add an independent clause. I'm going to show students, I showed students how to do a very basic form of that with a preposition. And then there does exist a compound complex sentence. And it is usually one dependent clause. Numbers can vary here, but once we get too complex with having multiple independent clauses together or having too many dependent clauses or independent clauses in a sentence, we get very close to a run-on sentence. So I gave students some important prepositions. So most of these pretty well translate. However, once we get around and n, some of the phrases we need to be a little bit more careful with, but usually they're pretty easy for students to use, right? And conjunctions. So the conjunctions don't change. They're pretty direct. Students have seen porque before when there is a space between the R and the Q and there is an accent mark over the E. Porque becomes the word why. When it is one word together and it is without a comma, we're going to see it as because. So next, I asked students for homework to make three compound sentences and three complex sentences. So in order to do that, they've already started this by creating small, independent, simple sentences, excuse me. Now we are just linking them together. So pero, if you remember, expresses a contradiction because we're using but. So, la mujer es vieja. So the woman is old, but ella es atlética. So, but she is athletic. So there's an example of a compound sentence. Now, to make a complex sentence, I'm going to ask students to start off with one of the prepositions and use it to make a time or location. So, durante escuela estudiamos ciencias. So during school, we study science. At 9:30 a las 9:30, canto con mi clase. I sing with my class. Or en la clase, hablamos sobre, or hablamos de gramática. So in class, we speak of grammar. So what I want students to see is that with using some simple prepositions and conjunctions, that they have the possibility of linking ideas that they think are important together and that they are not limited. What they are limited by right now is the vocabulary that they have not mastered. And if students feel comfortable with forming these sentences and forming complex sentences, I think they're also going to be pushed to look for other vocabulary words to make them more successful, more proficient, and to challenge themselves. So thank you very much for listening. Please give me feedback. Goodbye.